Welcome to Learning English from People.
Dick Cheney, the most powerful vice president in U.S. history. In the story of modern America, few people have been as powerful or as controversial as Dick Cheney. For some, he was a strong and steady leader. They believed he guided the country with great determination through the crisis of the September 11th attacks. But to his critics, he was a dangerous figure. They saw him as the man behind a disastrous war, someone who grabbed too much power for the presidency. One thing is certain: Dick Cheney was the most powerful vice president in American history. He was a quiet man, but behind his calm appearance was a sharp mind and a will of iron. His personality was full of contradictions. He was a loyal government servant who deeply distrusted government overreach. He was a man who avoided one war but became the biggest champion for another. His journey from the open plains of Wyoming to the center of global power is a story about ambition, belief, and the heavy consequences of using power in a time of fear. To understand the man, we must start at the beginning. Cheney's story begins not in Washington, D.C., but in Lincoln, Nebraska, where he was born in 1941. His family soon moved to Casper, Wyoming. This was a place of wide open spaces, a land that taught him to be practical, reserved, and deeply conservative. These values would shape his entire political life. In high school, he met Lynn Vincent. They became partners in life, and together, they would become a powerful force in politics for decades. His path to success was not a straight line. He went to Yale University, a world far from the life he knew in Wyoming. He admitted that he struggled there. He didn't apply himself to his studies and eventually dropped out. This early failure was followed by a difficult time in his life. He was arrested twice for driving while drunk. These moments were a serious wake-up call. He later said the arrests forced him to think about where I was and where I was headed. He realized he was on a bad path. He returned home to Wyoming and enrolled in the state university. There, he finally found his focus, earning both a bachelor's and a master's degree in political science. Another important part of his early life was the Vietnam War. As the war grew, Cheney, like many young men, had to face the military draft. He received 5 deferments, which allowed him to legally avoid service. Some were for his college studies, and one was because he had a family. Years later, when asked about this, he gave a blunt and controversial answer. "I had other priorities in the 60s than military service." This honest statement would be used by his critics to question his strong support for military action later in his career. After finding his passion in political science, Cheney moved to Washington, D.C. This is where his rise to power began. In 1969, he started working for a Republican congressman. His sharp mind and hard work quickly got him noticed by Donald Rumsfeld, an ambitious politician in the Nixon administration. Cheney became Rumsfeld's student, and the two men formed a close alliance. This partnership would one day change American foreign policy forever. He worked with Rumsfeld through the difficult years of the Nixon presidency, learning how the government worked from the inside. The Watergate scandal destroyed Richard Nixon's presidency. But for Cheney, this crisis created an unexpected opportunity. When Gerald Ford became president, he made Rumsfeld his chief of staff. Cheney came with him as his deputy. Just a year later, Rumsfeld became the Secretary of Defense. And at only 34 years old, Dick Cheney became the youngest White House chief of staff in American history. In this powerful job, he controlled the flow of information to the president. He saw firsthand the immense authority of the presidency. It was here that he developed a core belief. To keep the country safe, the president needed to be strong and assertive. This idea would become the central theme of his entire career. When President Ford lost the election in 1976, Cheney returned to Wyoming. He wasn't retreating. He was building his own political future. In 1978, he was elected to Congress. For the next 10 years, he built a reputation as a solid conservative. His voting record showed his core beliefs. He voted against creating the Department of Education, seeing it as the federal government taking too much power. He also voted against sanctions on the apartheid government in South Africa, arguing that its opponents were terrorists. He was a man of strong conservative principles. By 1989, he had become the second most powerful Republican in the House of Representatives. His career in Congress ended with another surprise call. President George W. Bush needed a new Secretary of Defense. He chose the respected congressman from Wyoming. Cheney was confirmed easily. As head of the Pentagon, he oversaw the military at a time of great change. The Cold War was ending, and the world was uncertain. Cheney managed the difficult task of making the military smaller while keeping America the world's strongest power. His time as Defense Secretary was defined by two major military actions. The first was the 1989 invasion of Panama to remove the dictator Manuel Noriega. The second was much bigger, Operation Desert Storm. In 1990, Saddam Hussein's Iraq invaded its small neighbor, Kuwait. Cheney was at the center of the American response. He was a calm and effective crisis manager. He worked with General Colin Powell to build a large international coalition. The war was a great military success. Kuwait was freed in just 100 hours of ground combat. But after this victory, Cheney made a decision that would seem deeply ironic years later. The American-led forces stopped. They did not go to Baghdad to remove Saddam Hussein from power. In an interview in 1994, Cheney explained why. He said that going to Baghdad would have broken the coalition apart. It would have meant a long and costly American occupation of Iraq. It would have trapped the United States in a political quagmire. He asked how many American lives Saddam Hussein was worth. His answer was clear: not very many. It was a sharp warning that he himself would one day ignore. After Bill Clinton won the presidency in 1992, Cheney left government for the private sector. He became the CEO of Halliburton, a huge energy services company. In 5 years, he helped the company grow around the world and became a multi-millionaire. But this job would later cause him problems. Halliburton received large government contracts to work in Iraq after Cheney became vice president. This led to accusations that he was using his political power to help his old company. In the year 2000, George W. Bush won the Republican nomination for president. He asked Cheney, the experienced Washington insider, to lead the search for his vice presidential running mate. After reviewing many candidates, Cheney reported back to Bush. Then, in a move that surprised everyone, Bush asked Cheney himself to join the ticket. Cheney accepted. He was returning to the center of power. From the very beginning of the Bush-Cheney administration, it was clear this would be a different kind of vice presidency. Cheney was not just an advisor, he was a full partner in governing. He had incredible access to the president and influence over major decisions. He knew the government bureaucracy better than anyone. This allowed him to place key allies, like his old mentor Donald Rumsfeld, in top positions. Then came the morning of September 11. 2001. As planes hit the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, Cheney was rushed to a secure bunker beneath the White House. With President Bush on Air Force One, Cheney was on the ground in Washington, making critical decisions in the first hours of the attack. That day changed everything. It gave him the single, driving purpose that would define the rest of his time in office. In the attacks, Cheney saw an act of war. He believed it required a new, far more aggressive response. He became the main architect of the War on Terror. He was the driving force behind the administration's most controversial policies. He strongly supported the Patriot Act, which gave the government new surveillance powers. He defended the NSA's program to listen to phone calls without a warrant. He argued for the use of enhanced interrogation techniques on suspected terrorists. He believed that in a time of war, the president had broad powers that could not be limited by Congress or the courts. He called this the dark side, a place where the nation had to operate to defeat its enemies. His main focus soon turned to Iraq. Cheney became convinced that Saddam Hussein was a major threat. He believed Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, and was working with the terrorist group Al-Qaeda. He became the administration's strongest voice for war. In public, he spoke with absolute certainty about the threat. He said Iraq had WMDs. He said Iraq had ties to Al-Qaeda. The evidence for these claims was weak. In some cases, it was completely wrong. Later investigations found no WMDs and no real connection between Saddam and Al-Qaeda. But in the fearful years after 9/11, Cheney's confident arguments won the day. The man who had once warned of a quagmire in Iraq now led the nation directly into one. He never backed down from his defense of the war, even as it became a long and bloody conflict. He dismissed critics and famously replied to a poll showing most Americans opposed the war with 2 words: "So what?" His time as vice president was filled with controversies that added to his image as a secretive leader. His energy task force met with top energy executives, but refused to make its records public. He was also involved in a scandal that led to the conviction of his chief of staff, Scooter Libby. Even a personal accident became a national story. In 2006, while hunting, Cheney accidentally shot a friend in the face and chest. His friend survived, but Cheney's team waited nearly a day before telling the public. The incident reinforced the idea that he was a man who operated by his own rules, far from public view. When he left office in 2009, Cheney was one of the most unpopular politicians in America. But he did not disappear. He became a sharp critic of President Obama's policies. He also showed a surprising side. He became one of the most famous Republicans to support same-sex marriage. This position was influenced by his daughter Mary, who is openly gay. His final political chapter was his most dramatic. Cheney was a lifelong Republican, a titan of the conservative movement. But he watched with growing alarm as Donald Trump reshaped his party. The breaking point was the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. He stood firmly with his daughter, Congresswoman Liz Cheney, as she became one of Trump's biggest critics. In an ad for her campaign, he looked into the camera and called Donald Trump a coward and the greatest threat to our republic in the nation's history. This journey reached its stunning conclusion in 2024. Dick Cheney, the conservative icon, announced he would vote for the Democratic nominee, Kamala Harris. It was a final, complete break with the party he had served his entire life. Dick Cheney's legacy is complex and deeply divided. He was a man of enormous consequence. He changed the power of the presidency and redefined the role of the vice president. His life was a study in contradictions. He was a Yale dropout who became a master of policy. He was a man who avoided one war but championed another. He was a lifelong conservative who ended his career by rejecting his own party. For some, he will always be a villain who led America down a dark path. For others, he was a patriot who did what he believed was necessary to protect his country. What is not in doubt is that Dick Cheney was a pivotal figure in American history. For better or for worse, he left a permanent mark on the nation and the world.